Hi there, I'm Jen. This is Remembered Reads, and this is going to be 2 of the letter tags that were created by Jim from Jim's books, Reading and Stuff, because I can't say his channel name without doing that gesture. I was tagged to do the R tag because my channel name is Remembered Reads and there's 2 R's, but I also saw a number of people doing the Q tag over the past couple of days, and there is a question in there about quantity quality that everybody had the same answer to, but I'm going to have a different answer, so I decided I would do that tag as well. All right, so let's start with the questions. Question number 1 is Q is for quick. What was a quick read for you? A book you read in 1 or 2 sittings. So the other day I read Jamilia by Chinggis Aymatov. This is a Kyrgyz novel from the 1950s that's set during the Second World War. It's fairly short, but I set out to read 30 pages of it, and it was so compulsively readable that I read the whole thing. And again, it's not very long, so maybe that's a bad example, but I did feel compelled to read it all because it was highly entertaining. I will talk about that in a wrap-up sometime in the future. Q is for question, and Jim says you can ask him a question in the comments below and he'll answer all of them. You can ask me a question, but I make no promises that I'll answer all of them. What is your favorite question word? Probably why, because for what reason has this happened? And I guess what is in the implicit question of why. But yes, because I'm curious about things, probably why. Q is for quantity and quality. And this is the question that I'm doing this tag just to answer. Would you rather read 10 okay books in a month or 1 very good book? And everybody that I've seen answer this has said they'd rather read 1 very good book and that numbers don't matter, blah, blah, blah. And I agree that numbers don't matter in the sense of reading is not a competition. However, if we're talking about a novel or poetry or a graphic work, then yes, I would rather read 1 quality book. However, if we're talking about nonfiction and I'm researching a particular topic, and I don't really care if it's well written, I just care if the information is reasonably correct or at least presents generally accepted theories. If the answer is yes to those things, I don't care if it's well written. I would rather read more things and be able to work out what is the reality or the most accepted theory on this thing. So if we are talking about nonfiction and the books are okay, not that they're poor quality or poorly researched, but just not the best written, then yes, I'd rather read more and learn more than read 1 really well written, potentially more general book, because in my experience, a lot of the more general books are better written. So quality, if we're talking about artistic quality in an artistic work like poetry or a novel, then yes, I'd pick quality over quantity. But if I'm trying to learn and gather information, I'd pick quantity over stylistic quality, assuming that the research quality is equal in both. Q is for queer. Do you have a favorite queer author? I feel like it's odd to talk about living writers because not everybody's out and whatnot, and I think you have to respect people's both privacy on that and their own evolutions. Like, there are lots of authors that I read 20 years ago that I wouldn't have realized were queer if I hadn't Googled them recently. Like, I bought this collected edition of The Invisibles, and I happened to Google Grant Morrison because of that, and I hadn't realized that they were non-binary because back in the 90s people weren't using that label, and that's some of the commentary you can read from them if you see how about their own kind of evolution of identity and stuff. That said, if Jim does say in the notes that this is just an umbrella term for essentially non-heteronormative anything, so if we were talking about dead people, dead authors, that sounded kind of morbid. So if I'm talking about dead authors or general favorites, one of my, I guess, top 5 favorite novels of all time is K.S.L. Diker's The Quiet Violence of Dreams, and he was not heterosexual. He's been dead. He killed himself probably 15 years ago, but how he would have identified now, I don't know, but it seems like an appropriate label. My favorite poem of all time is Wilfred Owen's Strange Meeting, and Wilfred Owen also was a non-heterosexual person. Again, he's been dead more than 100 years, so who knows how he would have identified in a different situation, but yeah, we'll go with them. The next question, Q is for quiet. Do you need quiet to read? No, I actually find quiet really distracting, and again, outside of these last 2 years where we're in a weird version of the world, I've done most of my reading on subways and trains and buses or at the gym. So there is always noise around you if you're in public like that. So I do traditionally do most of my reading when it's noisy. Yeah, I was reading on the outdoor patio of a restaurant recently for the first time in, well, since this whole pandemic thing on the weekend, and it was nice. I felt like I was in the rhythm of reading because I was in public and not in my house. So yes, I do not need quiet. Or no, I don't need quiet. Yeah. Next question, Q is for Quran. Have you read the Quran? Yes, I read it every year or so. I don't know. You want to see? We'll tilt this up. That's the, what is it? Shakespearean English, modern English, and Arabic. Apologies for the mess on my top shelf. Next question, Q is for Quack. Why does Pei have so many ducks in his videos? Pei of attention, exclamation point. Who doesn't like rubber duckies? So why not? Next question, Q is for Queensland, Qatar, Quito, and Quebec. Have you read a book from any of these places? Well, having gone to secondary school in Canada, I of course read Roch Carrier's La Guerre Sœur in school, as I think everybody did. So, yes. Also, Shandai Doki, everybody read that in school as well. The hockey sweater in English. Quito, yeah. I feel like the last thing that I read that I know was set in Quito as opposed to just Ecuador in general was Ludwig, what's his last name? It starts with a B. Anyway, I think it's called The Donkey something. I will find that and insert it here, but that's the last thing I read that was set in Quito. Qatar, I don't know, but I have a bunch of books that aren't set there but are from a university press there. So there we go. Queensland, I don't think so, because I'm woefully underread when it comes to Australia. Q is for Quaker. Has there been a Quaker protagonist or character in any of your reading? And I'm sure there have been, but I can't think of any. That said, one of my favorite novels of all time, again, was Black Beauty by Anna Sewell, which these days we think of as a children's novel, but it was originally written as an argument for animal rights. And she was born a Quaker and buried a Quaker, although I think she became Anglican or something in the middle of her life, but she had Quaker origins in any case. So that's not really the question because it says character, not author. But anyway. Next question. Q is for quote. Can you share some quotes about reading? I think it was Groucho Marx who said, outside of a dog, a book is a man's best friend. And inside of a dog, it's too dark to read. But Q is for Quill. Have you had any of your writings published? I used to write technical documents as part of a systems administration job that I used to have. So people have read that. I feel like on BookTube, when people talk about writing, they, in general, talk about either fiction or serious academic nonfiction and not technical writing. But yeah, I've had technical writing that people have read. Okay, final question. Q is for Quiz Question and Quillip. Which Dickens novel is he from? The Old Curiosity Shop, which I haven't read, but I know that because that is the character that's described as dwarfish and he's a villain. So when you read disability studies stuff, they will often comment on the writing, the framing of a character as dwarfish, and what that means. It's supposed to emphasize their villainy. The bonus questions. Do you have a favorite book about a queen? Actually, I have a book here that I haven't read before called The Sultan and the Queen that's about Queen Elizabeth I and her political relations. So I don't know if that counts. Next, Q is for what I think is supposed to be Quetzal, but it's spelled Quetzal. Quetzal is the name of a Mexican restaurant here in Toronto. And I've seen and the question is, have you seen one? And I have seen the birds in the zoo, but not in the wild, I don't think. Q is for quadruped, which is a chance to show your four-legged friend. Sadly, I have no four-legged well, that's not true. I have friends who have pets, and I would count them as my friends, but I do not currently have any live pets. I'm now thinking of the scene in The Great Muppet Caper where Piggy breaks into this posh family's house and the guy is played by John Cleese. And he has a line that's like, I thought you said the pets were dead. Yes, my pets are dead. That was awkward. All right, next question. Q is for Quarrel. Have you ever argued about a book? And I have belonged to real-life book clubs with friends where you do argue just for fun. So yes, in that sense, but not in a serious, no, people are wrong on the internet kind of way. So yeah, that's the end of the Q tag. Next, the R tag, which I was actually tagged in. Number 1, R is for reading. Why do you love reading? The answer is because I like to know stuff and it usually costs money to take classes, but the library at least where I am, is free. R is for Russia. Who is your favorite Russian writer? I don't know. I feel like it's pretentious to say any of the great Russian writers, so I'll just mention that I really enjoyed reading Gazel Yakhina's Zuliha earlier, and she's a modern Russian writer, so I think everything just moved when I put that book down. R is for romance. What is your favorite romantic novel? My favorite genre romance was a book called Winning Ruby Heart. And the writer was, I don't know. I'll have to find it and insert it here. But I don't read a huge amount of genre romance, and when I do, it's usually historical stuff. That was not. That was a contemporary romance between an ultra marathon runner and a wheelchair marathoner. And it's sort of an enemies to lovers trope because the wheelchair racer guy is also a sports journalist who had exposed this ultra marathoner who, when she was just a middle distance runner running at the Olympics, had a drug scandal and that he broke. So anyway, it was ridiculous, but I love endurance sports, and I like to critique portrayals of disability in popular fiction, and that was, so that was right up my alley. R is for Renoir. Do you have a favorite Renoir painting? Not really my favorite art style, but I'll say the one with the umbrellas, which it will be hilarious if that's actually called umbrellas. I'll insert it here. R is for Regency. Do you have a favorite book written in the Regency period, other than by Jane Austen? Is that when the Ode to Napoleon Bonaparte was written? That was Lord Byron, right? I'm going to say that. Although I'm going to have to look up if it's actually written in the right period. But I think it was. I don't know. All right, the next one is R is for Romain Clay. Tell us about one that you like, which is in between inspired by real life and autofiction. Like, you've changed people's names, but it's mostly satire, like, so you don't get sued. I don't know. I would rather people write straight up autofiction if they're going to be inspired by real life. Although I realize that the whole point is more satirical than an autofiction is more like a memoir, but I don't know. Am I wrong? I mean, I'm sure it originally was not because of lawsuits, but that is my assumption now. Next question. R is for Rustaveli, the most revered Georgian writer. Have you heard of him? No, only from Jim, who did a video about Georgian writers. All right, the next question is complicated. So you're isolated in a log cabin with books by the following writers: Racine, Kathy Reichs, Anne Rice, Ian Rankin, Ruth Rendell, Arundhati Roy, J.K. Rowling, and Salman Rushdie. Rank the authors by your personal preference. So I haven't read Kathy Reichs or Racine or Ian Rankin. I'm not sure if I've read any Ruth Rendell. I've definitely seen TV series based on her mysteries. J.K. Rowling, I'm one of the only people on BookTube who's never read the Harry Potter series. I read the first couple of chapters of the first one, and it wasn't for me. And I'm too old to be part of the generation who grew up with them, so I don't have a nostalgia factor. I read a couple of her mysteries, and I didn't think they were particularly good. Not a favorite. The only Anne Rice I've read is Cry to Heaven, which is not a vampire novel. It's about a historical novel about castrato singers having drama in Italy. It's very Baroque, which I guess a book about castrato singers should be. It was fun, but I haven't read most of her work, so hey. Arundhati Roy, I think would be interesting, because if you read like her articles and nonfiction that she's written, more so than her novels, I think that's really interesting. Salman Rushdie, I liked Midnight's Children. I thought Satanic Verses was not that great, but I really don't like fake celebrities, fiction about fake celebrities. Like, there are a lot of novels that have been hyped on BookTube that are about fake bands or fake actors, and I was like, no, I don't want the fake Bollywood stars. However, I really liked his essay. I really liked his essay collection, Imaginary Homelands, though. That was great. So depends what books they were. Yes, I would reread Imaginary Homelands. I would reread Cry to Heaven. I don't know that I want to read a bunch of mysteries and vampire novels, though. All right, bonus prompt. R is for Robots. Do you have a favorite book about robots? You know what was a good story about robots? And this is not a full novel, but Ken Liu wrote a Star Wars tie-in that was a series of short stories that were essentially connected to the original trilogy, but from side characters. And there was one that was a bunch of droids talking about like the Star Wars mythology, essentially, and that was great fun. So I'm going to call that my favorite. R is for rhyme. Do you have a favorite nursery rhyme? I don't think I do. R is for ranking. How would you rank the books that you've read this year? Best, second best, and worst. And I have to look at the books that I've read this year. I think that's the last question. Is that the last question? That is the last question. I feel like everybody just does these. You don't need to be tagged in them, but if you have an R or a Q anywhere in your name, be it your channel name or your real name, consider yourself tagged. Because I think that's the way Jim normally does it. And I'm sure there are people that, yeah. There you go. Anyway, thanks to Jim for creating these tags, and cheers for watching this if you got to the end of it. I don't know how long this is going to be. Hopefully I'll edit it down and it will not be endless. Anyway, that's it for now. Ciao.